The year is 1971. The Cold War is rampaging, and the United States has one goal: stop the spread of communism. The US has sent troops to democratic South Vietnam to combat communist North Vietnam, or the Viet Cong. But the Americans back at home are growing increasingly dissatisfied, exhausted, and worst of all, angry with the war effort, especially after the National Guard killed 4 students protesting the war at Kent State University the year prior. With anti-war pressure growing, the US is running out of time. They've got one shot to change American public morale, the reputation of containment, and perhaps the entire fate of the Cold War.
On February 8th, 1971, South Vietnamese soldiers enter the southern side of Laos with the goal of disrupting the Ho Chi Minh Trail, North Vietnam's system of tunnels and trails supplying troops and soldiers throughout communist-leaning Laos, and ending a quick morale-boosting victory. They are alone on the ground. The American Congress has banned sending American troops specifically into Laos on land, but the Americans send in air support to compensate.
Helicopters span the air, including the new Cobra AH-1 and the CH-47B Chinook. They are also armed with AK-47s, the latest and greatest rifle gun at the time. The M60 machine gun was also deadly, capable of firing a maximum of 650 rounds per minute.
As the troops cross into Vietnam, they feel at ease. The Vietnamese top-notch soldiers were selected for the mission, and they met little resistance on their journey along Laos Route 9. The troops reached the city of Japon in mid-February and hunkered down after such an easy expedition. Little did they know, that was the only peace they would see for a month.
North Vietnam launches a sudden counteroffensive on the city, and the battle begins, but what the Americans don't realize is that their enemy is on their home turf, and they've prepared.
The Viet Cong intelligence has fortified defenses and military bases, as well as planted hundreds, even thousands of booby traps throughout the course of the war. Additionally, the airborne Americans are in for a rude awakening. Vietnam's air defenses are stronger than anticipated.
The U.S. provided air support, and that air support was largely U.S. Army helicopters, and they would provide close air support to the soldiers on the ground. We were doing that. We'd provide close air support, but generally it wasn't very close. You'd try to find a column of tanks moving down the road and attack it or something. Unfortunately, the pink teams decided they could duel with the AAA on the ground. Huge mistake, and many, hundreds of U.S. Army helicopters were shot down there, and a large number of soldiers who flew those helicopters were killed or wounded in the process.
Viet Cong intelligence had been inspecting an invasion at some point, and 30,000 troops fought ferociously against only 16,000 South Vietnamese troops. In what was South Vietnam's first operation without U.S. military advisors on the ground, it was a massacre.
American intelligence believed the operation wouldn't meet much resistance. That had been a critical error. Wounded soldiers were hurriedly rushed to nearby hospitals. When wounded South Vietnamese Ranger Tran Van Gu arrived, he only had this to say: "The North Vietnamese are frightening."
The Viet Cong's guerrilla warfare and tactical brilliance outside of traditional warfare proved superior, and the South Vietnamese ordered a retreat after weeks of battling. The Viet Cong relentlessly followed their prey during the month of March until finally, on the 26th, the last of the troops crossed back into South Vietnam from Laos. The campaign had been a massive failure.
South Vietnam lost 1,160 troops, and 4,000 were wounded. 253 Americans were dead, of which 215 came from helicopter casualties. 107 helicopters were destroyed, and 618 were damaged, of which 20% never expected to fly ever again.
The campaign's failure was the breaking point for the Americans. The media tripled the number of soldiers killed and wounded. Future battles featuring American air support proved victorious at times, but the people knew that once America pulled out, it was over. President Nixon pulled troops from Vietnam starting in 1973, and 2 years later, the Viet Cong finally captured the South Vietnam capital of Saigon. Vietnam was reunited under communist leadership, where it stands to this day. The containment of communism had failed.